Anyone else? Okay. I'll jump right into this little presentation. Just a little background. This traditional software quality, at least how I view it, I have this is like the waterfall method. I've seen this in practice where you have like all the coding, and then after that you kind of like give it to a test team, and they do their testing, and maybe there's some back and forth of like, oh, it doesn't work, make it work, and oh, it still doesn't work, and it's a way to do testing. It's got some like benefits and drawbacks. I'm not particularly fond of this approach to like looking at quality because I think it leads to a lot of like conflicts, a lot of like problems, like where the development team kicks it over to QA team kicks it over to development team, and just kind of back and forth, and like it's hard. It can be hard to get things done, and also you see problems really late, and you might catch something that like requires a ton of work at the last minute, and you have to go back and do that work, or just ship something that doesn't work or has workarounds and compromises. And so, I mean, there are some benefits to this as well, like having testers that are completely black boxing and don't know what's going on with the code can certainly hit some issues or find issues that like they wouldn't thought of if they knew the internals of the code. But I don't particularly like this model, and this is why. I'll give you a minute to read this. So things like this can happen where like things go out to production and we haven't really tested it as well as we can. So I guess the question is, and I feel like I'm kind of new to like QA type of role, and I don't know, like I feel like there's kind of a movement away from this kind of traditional waterfall type of approach, and maybe it's my like blinders that I'm seeing it, but I do think there's a better way than this, and so that's what I want to talk about. And there's kind of a couple resources that I'm going to reference a lot in this. I'm going to pull most of the material from, and also just kind of my own personal experience. The first is from Atlassian. It's a YouTube video, and I will post these charts on the meetup group after this, so you can like go find these videos and stuff. This one's really good. It's like half an hour, I think. It's called Quality at Speed. It's one of Atlassian's lead test people, and I'll go more into their role in during this, but just talking about how they test and their kind of their quality process and what that looks like. And the other one is this book right here, which I read recently, How Google Tests Software, which has a lot of like really interesting stuff. I'm not going to go over all of it in this, but I'm going to kind of compare it to the Atlassian approach and kind of maybe talk about some of the approaches we use here at Yodle and what other people see, if other people want to chip in with what they see and all that, that would be great. The first question I want to ask is just who in an organization, who is responsible for quality? And if you go back to the waterfall method, like I think this is really one of the problems is that the developers write their code and then they pass it off to a quality team that's responsible for making sure it's quality. And I would really argue that doesn't work at all if you have this separate QA team that's in charge of quality. So this is from How Google Tests Software. I really like this quote. The burden of quality is on the shoulders of those writing the code. Quality is never some tester's problem. If you are an engineer, you're a tester. So that's very strongly how I feel, that you can't like throw testers at code to add quality. Yeah.
If I can build on that,
yeah.
I think the business is also responsible for quality.
Yeah.
It's actually the team. Yeah. When you say that, it's the team is responsible for the quality. It's not just QA.
Not just the engineers.
Not just the engineers. It's
yeah.
Or a use case or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Nobody's gonna disagree with you.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I agree with that. Like quality, like the organization has to be committed to quality for it to work. And like everyone needs to do that. And yeah, so like you can't just throw testers at some code to like make it better. That can just, you can find more defects maybe, but so that brings up, so that's like who's responsible for quality, and it should be everyone. So kind of like, what does QA mean in that type of environment? So Google has, these are the kind of the quality roles they have. Google has two basic quality roles. First is software engineering and test, whose job is kind of like, look at the code, make it testable, make sure it's testable. Okay. Yeah, so software engineering test, make code testable. Also look at kind of general kind of test infrastructure, building automation tools, that type of thing. And then they have a test engineer role that is kind of almost more of like a traditional testing role. But they're looking at very much from kind of like users, the user's need and the developer's second. Most companies aren't as big as Google. So having like teams of software engineering tests and teams of test engineers can be really hard. I know we don't have enough resources for that. So we kind of have one person that kind of fulfills both these roles of software engineer test and test engineer, and they just kind of put on those two hats depending on the needs of the team. Yeah.
So are your test teams centralized in like a test team, or are they dispersed amongst like agile pods?
They're both. So here, what we do is we have agile, like a feature team of like a manager and a product owner and like 3 to 5 software engineers, and then we embed like a quality engineer in with them. So that's their team, and that's who they're working with. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on, kind of like what that looks like. But then they go through a different management chain, which is nice. So like my team, as a manager, my team is these other develop engineers. They're all embedded in other teams. So they're working with the team really closely and helping the team out. But then if they need to like really push on quality, there's no pressure from management to like ship something that's not ready to be shipped. If that makes sense.
I said never.
Yeah.
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 Google's recently changed the title from software engineer and test to SETI, which is a software engineer tools and infrastructure.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's
Cool.
the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. And the other thing I think is really interesting was Atlassian. They call their team members quality assistants. Is an interesting title, and and then their kind of role is to protect the customer and to educate the developers. Which I thought that like quality assistance instead of assurance is really interesting, because they're really there to help the developers build in quality, not to like take that role. This is another interesting thing, and this is from Google again, but their kind of test team, along with some other teams, are under like the umbrella of engineering productivity, which I really liked that idea, where the tester's job isn't like making quality, but it's like increasing the productivities of the engineers to help them develop, help them like be more productive. And here's some quotes from the book talking about software engineering test, I believe. Their actual mission is one of productivity. A large part of productivity is avoiding rework because of sloppy development. And so quality is a large part of that productivity. So like, I really like that because it like, it's very like a good like argument for having more quality and making sure teams are making that investment in quality and not just like pushing stuff out. Cool. And then this is the other thing I really like about one of the things Google said about quality and kind of that it's the team's ownership and not like throwing testers at it. I'll read it real quick. No project gets testing resources as some right of existence. The onus is on the development teams to solicit help from testers and convince them that their project is exciting and full of potential. Yeah. You be Google. But I really like that, and I want to, this is one thing I kind of want to get more of here, where like a team just doesn't expect to have a quality resource, that they have to actually like fight for that and show that like that they want that, and like that they're willing to work for it and not just abuse it. Another quote from the book I didn't put in here, but I thought was really cool is, and it was part of this area, that Google, they don't want teams to just like get a tester or a software engineer test or whatever and like just give them menial work. So like no manual, like just go through and click all these, but they want them to have like a real impact. And so that's why that's like part of this, is that it's like really like, we want our testers to have an impact, not just be doing busy work. And if teams are just gonna give them busy work, then they just can do it themselves. So I think that's the end of like who should own quality. Are there any like questions or comments or thoughts about that so far? Yeah.
I think one of the reasons Google's so good at this is because they create new software so often. And so creating new software really gives them a chance to have developers in there first to try to create something of value high enough that the company will invest testers on it. Whereas a lot of us, we don't create new software that often. So yeah, we may not be able to create a culture easily that makes testers a rarefied product.
Yeah. I think one of the interesting things, and this would be something I'd like people to like chip in on, like how, if you're not Google or like Microsoft or like one of these big giant software corporations, like how to get this type of thing in a smaller company. And I think we're not obviously here, we're not trying to do exactly what Google does because it just isn't going to work for us. But like a lot of the ideas in the book are really interesting, and I really like, and I want to figure out like, and I'm trying to like figure out how do we get that in this like a smaller scaled down version of it to really kind of like focus and push quality.
Like what? What is it you like about that?
Like this, like teams having to like not like just getting test engineer assigned to them or whatnot, but having to like really fight for that and convince the test engineers that their project's good enough or the stuff they're working on is important enough that they care enough about quality that they deserve that kind of resource.
Places higher value, inherent value on being a tester. As
Yeah.
opposed to, you're just another person that
Somebody finds problems.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Reports them.
It also changes the flow of data movement, because you're no longer pushing your code to somebody and saying, hey, let me get by you. You're seeking somebody to validate your code. So you're more of like really trying to earn their help.
Yeah, I also think it helps as like if you look at quality, building software quality, QA or testing or whatever, as like an industry, it helps like raise the bar of the industry, because it's not so much, oh, we need someone to go in and like click on all these pages and make sure no links are broken, but it's like we need someone that can help our team like grow and be a leader and be a mentor to the other people and help not just like test, but help build an infrastructure to automate that and to make it like to have much more powerful things like continuous integration and continuous delivery and that type of thing. And that stuff I find super exciting, and want like to work with like really skilled people to build that type of thing and to make it better than it is today. So I think there's a lot of exciting stuff when you have that kind of view of like quality is important and we're going to invest in it, and we want really skilled, talented people to do that. There's a lot of exciting stuff you can do.
Google does that, was it 10% or 20% time?
Yeah.
That may be part of it too, where they give people 1 day a week where they can spend basically on whatever product they want. And so if they get to choose more often, maybe it will be more of a buyer's market, and they get to pick and choose what product they put their time on.
Actually, I've read the book, and basically, I think what they say is like an engineer is given, a QA engineer or software engineer and test engineers are given 18 months to get acclimated to the product.
Yeah.
Because you cannot be a good tester if you don't know the product well enough.
Yep.
And once that 18-month period is achieved, that engineer can then choose to either stay or jump around. And
Mhm.
they're more on and they are supported in that cause, because the more you know about the product, the better you become as a software engineering tester or tester.
Yep. Yeah.
I think that really, it speaks a lot in terms of like how you can be effective.
Yeah.
It's one thing to know the technology, it's also important to know what you're testing.
Yes.
And be good at it and figure out what the risks are in change. I mean, I've seen this in the company we work for where, we'll change this one thing. Well, if you don't know the product well enough to say that the risk of making that change is gonna cost us a lot, and not bringing up what the risks are,
Mhm.
there's a chance that you can push something in production not knowing that there's all that risks there. And it's just gonna blow up and it's gonna come back to you.
Yeah.
So, I think that's important to have that product knowledge.
Yep.
Plus, the chance for that person might leave would also encourage the team to try to sell them to stay. And be like, yeah, no, we would really like you to stay. What can we do to make testing easier, better, yeah. And if the person can leave, yeah, that's a big leverage.
Yep. Exactly.
Yep.
I think it's a good point about being familiar with the software. It's a lot about accountability. Who decides what quality is? If QA person is just a gatekeeper, then if it gets past the gatekeeper, but it still doesn't, work out in the market, then who's to blame? But if you have a team that really owns the software, because not only they know how to build quality, but they know what to, build the right thing and build it right, then
Yeah.
it has a much higher chance of succeeding.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so like an interesting thing I like to think about is like what is quality and like where are like the boundaries, because I don't like the idea that like quality is writing tests, because I feel like that's so limited, or like your code compiles, therefore it's quality, which is like not a great example, but like, or it does what it says it's going to do, so it's quality, even if there's tons of bugs and defects. But like where do you draw that line? Is it like meeting the customer's expectations? Like I could see that being considered quality. Does it performance and like security, and like there's tons of avenues you can look at that those I think are traditional quality. But like meeting customers' expectations and like driving revenue for the business, and like there's a lot of I would say aren't traditional like quality or QA kind of areas, but I think and then it, like from the book, like you said, the Google test engineers, they expect them to have very deep product knowledge, to know the products, and to be like the experts on the products. So
That's why it's justified, and I don't know if you're going to mention this, but you would think that companies so big, the ratio of dev and QA is probably 1-to-1. No, it doesn't. I mean, they didn't give that actual ratio, but what they say is that they purposely, and they call it their secret sauce. Their secret sauce is not having a lot of QA.
Yeah.
And their justification is you don't need a million. You don't need an army of testers. You just need the elite special forces kind of testers
Yeah.
who can really understand the product enough to test it and test it right.
Yep.
But to do that, you have to have a change in the organization as well.
Right.
But then
Yeah.
you put a lot of burden and responsibility on developers. So
Right.
you have to have an organization mind to
Yes.
achieve that.
Yes.
So otherwise, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
And then you're going to fail your customers. And speaking of Google, I mean, I read this book too, but if you think about it, what kind of software they produce, not all of the software they produce is that great quality. So I would, take some of it with some grain of salt.
Oh yeah.
I mean, if you ever had to manage a Google Apps domain, then you know what I'm talking about. Or whenever they notify you about being outages in their Google Apps environment, they can't even tell who is impacted. They tell you that the percentage of the users are impacted, but does it impact you or not? So is it really that half? They can tell you which stores you're shopping at, but they can't tell you what part of their software infrastructure has problems for which user population. So to me, that is like a failure. Of course, the browser is like fantastic, but how many millions of users are testing and reporting issues? And do they have a bug bounty program? It's not just their internal testers testing it. So,
Yeah, they also have this term called dog fooders.
Mhm. Yeah.
Which they have these people who are maybe internal or maybe external people who are not gonna see the external product yet, but they're the ones who are like hitting it and just testing it to make sure. So that's additional QA
Yeah.
resource if you think about it.
Yeah.
what I want to mention is the kind of software that they are producing, they can easily do A/B testing. I mean, roll out or just roll out the feature to a smaller user
Yep.
population.
Yep, and then
I
build
don't
it.
think everybody, one of us can afford that, especially you're not working on a SaaS solution, you're working on an on-prem product.
And we
That's-
only have like 2 customers, so, yeah. It's harder to just A/B test 2 customers.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, sometimes you have more people doing UAT, and you have customers who are gonna use it, you know, when it's launched, or, you know, not initially, so. But you have to have really good UAT, if that's something that's part of the process. You can't just be another formality where you say, oh, this salesperson's gonna test it, they're gonna say they love it, because they wanna sell it, you know. That used to happen to me, sales director always said, it's perfect, I love it, everything's great. I'm like, really? I mean, I found like 14 bugs my first 5 minutes, and, you know, did you see that? Oh, no,
Yeah. The expectations of quality are different.
Yeah.
Yeah, you gotta understand who your customer is and.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's different forms of the definition of quality too, like you
Yeah.
were alluding to earlier. There's subjective quality where it's, does this have good code quality? Is this maintainable in the future?
Mhm.
Is this blah, blah? There's also revenue quality. I can sell you something terrible, but if you'll buy it, is that high quality? Maybe in one regard, but not in another. So there's different realms, having different kinds of groups. Test that, you get a cumulative kind of, overall, you get a lot of definitions of quality.
Yeah.
Cool. Other thoughts, questions?
With respect to this quote,
Yeah.
this makes me think that this really comes out of that 10 or 20% time that you're talking about that Google allows for people. So if my pet project, aligns with your pet project time, can I convince you to spend your time on it? Like, I think for most of us probably we have negative 20% time or negative 30%.
Yeah.
We don't have the luxury
Yeah.
of being able to do that. And while I love the idea of it, it's like, if we manage to get development resources assigned to something and they manage to get finished, I can't imagine a scenario in which we say, well, listen, you gotta prove to me. And at this point, it's already attached to a revenue stream, but we're not doing it. Like we don't have the luxury of building out fun features just to see if they're gonna be something that we might use in the future.
Yeah, I think.
Other people may be in that position depending on their company, but we're definitely not in
I
that.
think it takes a true software company, like an R&D software, that's all they do type company to be able to implement that well. Because yeah, like you said, we have like a cost benefit and it has to get out to the market before we get the benefit. So yeah, we can't stop it halfway and say, is this worth spending time on? That's not really an option. But yeah,
Well, that's what makes the challenge, because I agree. What happens if a team can't convince testers to work with them?
Ship it.
Because they're, well, that's what I'm saying.
But it's exactly what happens.
Right, so more out the door, or you don't push it, which I'd say most companies probably wouldn't, they're like, nope, it's going.
yeah.
So how do you reproduce that effect in a small company without Google's size?
Yeah.
I don't know, because you have
Yeah.
to either make a business decision to say that we're willing to not push potentially shippable products because of that, or something else.
Or maybe this is a part where like the developers get really involved in testing. Maybe this is how we get them to be, super testers before we even jump in as QA people. Maybe if they know that their job's on the line, if it's not testable and there's no QA person to jump on it.
At the end of the day, I think that,
Yeah.
it's a business decision
Yeah.
what to ship. I mean, the QA team can only quantify that, hey, what's the quality? And, at the end of the day, you in the QA don't make that decision.
Yeah.
And
Business
it's not your
decides.
fault if the customer is upset. You did your
Yeah.
job reporting what you have to do.
Right, yeah. And we can tell you if you met that goal or not, but we don't really decide what the goal is.
It's quantizing risk.
Right.
It's not a barrier, you have to push the button for it.
Right, yeah.
Okay. Let's move on. Okay, so this is from both. I'm gonna go both the how Google tests software and Atlassian here. But with like the focus that we were just talking about, what are the big roles both of both of those organizations, and I think we try and do here, is because we don't want to put the burden of quality on testers, we want it on like everyone, and particularly developers. We want to make sure like they're contributing to that because they have a really big impact on the quality of whatever you're shipping. So both of those organizations and have this big role of educating developers on like quality. So Atlassian has gone through, this is called DOT, which stands for Developer on Test. And if you go through the YouTube, they'll take you through the whole history of this. And I'm just gonna summarize it real quick. Forgive me if I get some things wrong. But again, it's a good talk. It's like 30 minutes. I would recommend going and looking at it. But this was kind of phases in kind of their evolution of how their quality team worked. So the first is that they have a QA person, and that QA person does like exploratory testing on whatever is being shipped or changed or whatnot. They wanted to kind of expand that and evolve that and get developers more involved. So the next stage is they define this developer and test role, which is in a team, one of the developers gets assigned this developer and test role. And so the QA person and the developer and test are going to do the testing for that release or whatnot. And then the QA person is going to, once the release is ready, they're going to kind of do that exploratory testing on the release testing or on what's ready to be released. And then they wanted to kind of like get the QA person out of that kind of role and just let the developer and test focus on that. So kind of the next level was that they had this thing called a QA demo at Code Complete, where the QA person is going to sit down with the developer on test and like talk about how should we be testing this stuff, what should we focus on. I think they used the example of like the guy that wrote this feature always forgets to do something, so we should make sure and check that is getting done. And that kind of, so the developer and test is doing all the testing, but then the QA person is like sitting down with him beforehand and kind of like talking about, here's how we should test it, here's a strategy we should use. And so they're more advisors at that point. The next level was called, they decided to have a QA kickoff, and they used that example of like, this person doesn't like do this thing, and I don't remember what it was, so we should make sure and test that. Well, they decided, well, why don't we like talk about that before we start implement things, and so that person will know to do that. And so they had this QA kickoff thing instead, where they moved that demo, instead of at Code Complete, they moved it to like the beginning of the cycle, where the QA person was meeting with the team and talking about here's the features, here's what we should test, here's what we should make sure gets done. They moved on from that to get the QA person kind of even more out of the role. And so the developers were in charge of that kickoff and talking about those strategies. And then the QA person would kind of like review what they had and then kind of review that to make everything good. And then their ultimate goal was step 6, where there is no developer on test, just everyone does this thing. Everyone on the team kind of just does all this stuff. And so that's kind of the flow that Atlassian went through to get to the stage they're at. And different teams are at different like levels of this. But that's kind of their ultimate goal, is just get the feature team to be doing the testing and to be in charge of the testing and quality and not kind of have this specialized QA role.
So will there be like, or I don't know if there's like a developer that's assigned to do it per sprint I'm pretty sure that
Yeah.
developer would, I've been in a situation where in our team, it's been like QA heavy, dev light, and being agile and being like we're a team here, we go down together. So let's make this work. So the developers were helping us out, but that was good. But there's something wrong with there in that maybe there's something that needs to be done in terms of like what kind of deliveries we're making every sprint. But that's beside the point. The developers that I've talked to, they said, okay, so how do you feel? We do automation, so they like that.
Yeah.
Would you like to do this every sprint? And they're like, no, I prefer to be a developer, but if I'm called to do it, I will do it. So with Atlassian though, when are these developers developers called to help out with testing?
So I believe, and I maybe misremember, I believe the developer and test role, they would rotate around.
Okay.
So everyone on the team would do it like once a sprint. But then their ultimate goal is to just have everyone kind of do it all the time. And it's just part of the software engineering role is like maybe you don't test your own code, but you're testing someone else's code, and like you work on this feature and he works on this feature, and then you test each other. Like
The way they review code?
yeah, similar to that.
Or test that feature?
But the goal is to just have everyone is aware of quality. Everyone knows about testing. Penny Wyatt, who gave the presentation, it made the example. So there's this old Star Trek episode that I haven't seen, so I may totally get this wrong. But Captain Kirk, I guess, gets split into like two people, and one of them is like a good, like noble person, but very like timid and can't like get anything done. And the other one's like evil or bad, but he's very like aggressive and very good and efficient and get things done. And so you have this kind of chaotic state where the evil one was getting things done, but the good one who had good ideas was not. And she likened that to like software development, where we have developers who, and I didn't mean to make them the evil ones. Developers are really good at like writing code, and you have QA that's really good at testing code. And she makes the argument, why can't we just kind of join them together, where you can have one person that can be good at both, and that testing and quality isn't like someone else's responsibility, but that's a skill that developers can learn and can grow and can be good at that. So, yeah.
Sounds like you have a development background.
I do, yeah.
Were you a developer before this role, or were you?
Yes, I did. I spent 8 years doing AX kernel development.
Oh, okay. As a developer?
Yes. So, and then moved to this role doing more quality-based stuff. So yeah, cool. So Google, speaking of educating developers, Google, and they talk a little bit about this in the book. There's also a link that talks about it more. But they have this idea of like test certified. And I believe it's on per project. But they kind of gamify the whole educating about like how to get your project working. So they have different levels. I think this is kind of a cool idea, but so projects have different levels of like where they are test certified wise. So like level 1 is you have test coverage for your project. You can get the test coverage, and you have some continuous build system. Level 2 is that you're gonna block any release if there's red tests, and your code coverage is greater than 50%. I think they have 5 levels in the book, and I've kind of like cut a few out, and a few of the requirements out too, just to save room. So level 3 is you have required tests for any non-trivial change. Level 4, you have a set of smoke tests that can run in under 30 minutes. And these are just examples. There's a lot more detail in what they do, and they have a lot more in each level, and a lot more details too. But they have this test certified to like basically teach people like here's kind of some basic quality things that every project should have, and can help get a project like up to a certain quality standard. I don't remember if I put this in there or not. They also have I'm gonna forget the name, but basically quality mentors. So people that are like certified to mentor others in quality, and that can come. And one of the benefits of doing this test certified stuff is if you get your project to like a certain level, you get more attention from the mentors, and they can help you. And so it goes back to the earlier thing where like, if development teams are like showing that they care about quality and are doing these things, they get extra resources to help their quality and make it even better. Yeah, so that's kind of a couple of ways that Atlassian and Google like try and educate their developers to get them to have more knowledge about quality, more quality skills, and that type of thing. So any questions or comments? Yeah.
Do you guys here have continuous builds set up by the developers, or do you have like a DevOps team that helps with it, or hosting, or how do you guys do?
So we used to have a DevOps team that did a lot of that. We have transitioned since the time I've been here to now it's mostly on the developers. And the DevOps team kind of transitioned to be more in charge of like hardware type stuff. So yeah, so all our developers basically should know how to set up deploys and builds and all that type of thing.
Is there a reason why that was, you pivoted to that, change the way you do things, not having DevOps take care of it, but having developers do it?
I think it was like an ownership. We wanted teams to feel like they own that, and so like a common thing is there's a problem with the deploy, and like there's a handful of people that know how to solve that problem, and we want to kind of spread that knowledge out. So as the average developer can see that there's a deployment problem, they know what to do. They know how to go. They may not know everything to go fix it, but they can start investigating it, and they have some knowledge to like figure out. It's not just like, oh, it's red, let me call DevOps or whatnot, but they can start to investigate it, and they know what's going on. It's just not a black box. Cool.
Do you guys use like off-the-shelf, like Atlassian product, or do you guys use Chef or Puppet, or do you guys use a tool to help you?
We use all of that stuff. Yeah, we have a lot, and we have a lot of software. So we have a lot of legacy monolith stuff, and we've got kind of newer stuff. We're doing a lot of kind of microservices stuff. So we have a lot of like Docker, and we use Marathon and Mesos for orchestrating that. And so we use Bamboo and Jenkins for some deployment stuff, depending on if it's legacy or newer. And we have some of our own homegrown tools to help with the deployments and tracking all that. So we're kind of like all over the board as far as tooling goes.
And you guys have enough time, like as developers, to still like build new tools as you need them, or is there like one person or a group of people who do that?
We have an architecture team that's kind of in charge of that, and then various other teams will like chip in as the need is there. So it's really interesting. I think our QA team, while we do kind of like the regular like software, like building frameworks and writing tests and that type of thing, we also tend to be very involved with that kind of stuff. So we'll build tools to help with deployments. When we were rolling out when we decided to go to this microservices architecture, we had several QA resources kind of join that team to help build out what that infrastructure looks like. So our QA people tend to be like all over the place in terms of skills and like what they do. Yeah.
We also have like project startups or hackathon.
Yes.
Lots of teams, basically developers, QA, and so on, get together and just come up with ideas and implement them, or at least sort of kickstart it.
Yeah.
When do you find the time to do that?
Company uses them.
When, I mean, like, how often?
I think it's
We do about 3 times a year. Yep.
How many weeks,
It's just like 2-3 days.
Oh, 2-3 days.
Yeah. To like hack something together. Once they gave us a week, which was really fun.
But again, if in a couple of days you can demonstrate proof of concept, it might be picked up and developed later on.
Cool. So this next section, like looking at both Atlassian and Google, they put a lot of focus on getting developers really involved in writing tests and doing what like a traditional QA role would do. So the question in both of these, both in the book and in more so in the talk, is kind of like, so what does a QA person do then if they're not writing tests all day or manually testing things all day? So these first few slides are from Atlassian. And this one I kind of alluded to earlier, but it's like working with developers. So he talks about like in that developer on test, they have the QA demos and test notes, talking to developers about like how they're going to test their projects. They also will like sit down and pair test with them. So like pair programming, they'll sit down and help them write a test. They'll introduce new testing tools or teach developers automation and just share knowledge and kind of educate the developers on like how to do better quality. They'll also kind of like experiment. So they'll come up with ideas of maybe a different way of testing or something, and they will try it, and they'll kind of develop those, get some teams to buy in and try it and kind of measure the results and see if they've improved or not. And then I skipped one because I didn't have a lot to say about it. But another thing they do that we talked a little about earlier is they'll like be an advocate for the customer and really understand the customers and what the customers want and make sure that's being thought about. So becoming experts on kind of the product. And then they also kind of build things. They build testing tools, automation frameworks, knowledge sharing systems, defect analysis tools, just building the tools to automate the jobs so like they can have better quality. And then this is just a little more like what the Google roles do. They're a little more traditional than I think the Atlassian ones. But like software engineering test is to make things testable. Either like helping developers to structure programs so that they're testable, or giving them coding style guidelines, helping them do better unit testing, writing frameworks to help the developers automate their testing, just anything to help the developers test the products.
And
Yeah.
actually, to add to that, they consider the testability as part of a feature.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
It is a feature. It's
Yep.
ingrained. We make this button work. Yeah. Is there a testing framework that supports that? Yes. Okay, that's considered as a good feature.
Yep. Cool. And then there are test engineers. I think we've talked a little bit about this, but they're gonna find the riskiest parts of the software and like really kind of hammer on that and make sure that's working really well. And it's however it makes sense for that particular product. So they're gonna adjust. Like some products might not need as much, some products might need more. And I really like their kind of description. I think in both of these it alludes to that, where it's like they really need to understand the product and what the customers want from that product. And this bottom quote I like, that they're paid to protect the users and the business from bad design, confusing UX, functional bugs, security and privacy issues, and so on. So they kind of have that role of really understanding the product, understanding the customers, and all that stuff. So, yeah.
Would that place the role of performance testing and security penetration testing on the test engineer?
They
So the development team or?
did not go into a lot of details, so I don't know exactly how they look at those.
There may be advocates for performance testing, they may not be the ones who do it. They may like at Google have the same type of thing where they have the test engineers, and maybe something they have to convince performance guys to come over and work on the project a little bit or something. They may have like a small subset.
They're probably not running their own tests, they're probably like, this page should take 5 seconds.
Well, I know there's some built in, so yeah, of course, this is Google, and their parallel testing is out the wazoo, and they can literally run, all the servers in Washington State if they want to just run their tests. But I think that some of their test infrastructure is built in performance, so I think there is some, basic, it should take only so long for certain things to happen. But I don't, if I remember right, I don't remember them having a very specific,
I
this
don't
is a
think they
performance test.
mentioned that.
So,
And one thing I remember though, and I don't know if you're gonna touch on this, is the levels of testing that they do. They have small, medium, large.
Yeah.
And it's not the t-shirt sizing that we know about with estimation, it's more the kind of testing that's involved. And the performance testing and load testing, they consider that as large, but who tests that? I don't think it was mentioned.
I think it goes small, medium, large. I think large is at the top of the pyramid.
Oh, is it the
So
opposite?
the small is like the unit test level where you
Right.
test the smallest chunk
Small
level.
feature. And then
Yeah.
when it interacts like to functionality, that's considered medium.
Nearest
but now-
neighbor, yeah.
Now we start talking about like performance testing, load testing, it would take hours to test.
Mm-hmm.
That is considered large.
Well, and I wonder if they build those targets into like their initial small section too, like, hey, if my small section only takes, 11 microseconds to run or whatever, and I make this feature change, I test to make sure it still only takes 11 whatever to run. Maybe that's built into the small level too, and they might not do as much. I don't know. Yeah.
It could be embedded in the user experience requirements.
Because Google Speed is enterprise software. Enterprise software can take 3 days to run a process because they don't get a choice. So our speed is not quite the same issue as, an app, someone who develops an app or someone who develops, Google search or something like that.
Yeah.
Is that because of end-to-end view?
I think so. I would assume so. Where, the whole process is what's important at like the enterprise level. The whole thing has to work well together, whereas Google individual pieces are used, more in microservice type of architecture. And so they're able to test one endpoint to one outgoing probably way.
There's differences between consumer software and enterprise software.
Yeah.
Vast differences in there. We have to get people to try and want to use this, or we have to make sure we're delivering the value that we're charging and that we're competitive.
So yeah, enterprise software really does have different quality standards we have to hit.
It might look like crap.
Right, exactly. It looks like 1984. Yeah, the customer doesn't have a choice, but as long as the computations come out right and the values are produced in the right reports, that they can take longer to run.
It's good to hear you say that.
Okay. Yeah.
It's separate from performance problems.
Right. Yeah. Been
Like,
around
this
for a
report's
while.
gonna take 6 hours?
Yeah.
We're pedaling as fast as we can.
We're good. Add another hamster to the wheel if you want, but yeah.
But at the same time, we need to make sure that our tests don't take 5 weeks to run.
Right.
We have to be responsible for performance of our testing.
Right, yeah. Do you guys have like parallelized tests and stuff like that? You have to worry about that too?
Yep.
Yeah. We have large, long tests from the UI level. So a lot of our tests are not at the microservice level yet. And so a lot of our tests could take way too long to run if we didn't, worry about parallelizing. Yeah. Our stuff was developed when microservices weren't a thing. So we're getting there.
Yeah. Cool. So that's all I had prepared. But I would really like to continue the discussion, and particularly if people have experiences or stuff that they want to talk about and their kind of views. Yeah.
So with Yodle, what's the dev QA ratio do you have per team?
So most teams I think are around 3 to 5 devs and 1 QA person for each team, or 0 depending on the.
3 to 5, and
So
there's
4 to 1.
1.
Yeah.
4 to 1.
4 to 0.
Yes. A few
How does
cases
that
of
work
4 to
for
0.
you guys?
Dev ratio
That
is,
seems like
impossible.
Is that by design?
That's because we have a really hard time finding high quality QA people. It's really hard to find people that have kind of the QA skill set that we're looking for, because we expect them to be able to write frameworks and code and do the testing stuff. So it's challenging finding
what kind
that.
of challenges do you have you encountered in that ratio besides the fact that because the reason why I'm asking is we sort of have that issue, at least for the team that for the product that I'm supporting, where there's always that whole idea of as I mentioned, QA heavy,
Yeah.
dev light. Well, okay, so what's wrong here? And we ended up having the developers help us with testing.
Mhm.
We make it, but it's and it goes against the whole agile process where there's something wrong here and yet we're still continuing to do it. So there's
It's gonna have those fluctuations, right, both directions. You're gonna have some sprints that the work is, I expect the work is gonna be more dev
in
heavy
the
and QA
beginning,
light.
in the beginning,
and
yeah, because they weren't
like
ready
you said,
for us.
the team has to work to accomplish the sprint goal.
Mhm.
And that's not counter-agile. I would say regardless of resources, it's the team's job to get the work done.
Yeah.
And sharing the responsibilities. There's no defined roles in Agile. You don't have Agile recommends 4 devs and 2 QAs and 1 product owner.
Mhm.
It's there's a development team which can consist of UX, documents.
Yeah.
The product owner is kind of separate from the development team. The development team is everybody gets the work done.
Right.
It's a hard mindset I think it's a hard mindset for organizations to grasp.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's a hard sell to go back to the Dilbert cartoon. Dilbert used to have a cartoon of his manager walked up to him and asked him to do testing. He goes, for my own personal financial gain, I should refuse to the point of just shy of getting fired, because if he goes over to testing his personal the gain in his career could go down. And I think that's a mindset that's hard for our high technical QA people to overcome. Is that QA is a lesser of the two, and if a developer does QA stuff, they'll get paid less, be worth less, or something like that. And it's a hard stereotype to overcome, I think, in the developers, is to get them to want to do QA stuff without thinking it's a personal, sacrifice.
It's not a reality in the market right now either.
No, it's not.
Software engineers and tests are higher than software engineers and testers. I don't know if anybody's noticed that.
Well, yeah, having that trouble, with trying to hire, so,
There's a lot more
But-
developers.
One thing that made our developers, at least in the team I was in, that made them interested in helping out is because we had automation.
Yeah.
And at least the team that I was working on, we're doing a lot of API automation, so there's less UI work, which they find it very interesting because they don't have to deal with UI, they have to deal with the actual,
Mm-hmm.
performance of the API. It's basically, input, process, output.
Yeah.
And so that made them, hey, this is a new skill to have. I'm okay doing it, but it comes to like, hey, can you look at this screen and make sure you control the buttons?
yeah, right, yeah.
Really, you want me to do that?
Yeah.
It's not a high skill task, and
Yeah.
the developers, from experience, most of them like to believe that they're the highest technical people in the building, so telling them to just go click buttons sometimes will, result in anarchy, so, yeah.
So, an example, when I started here at Yodle, I was David, and I don't know the same thing, I was the engineering manager, which means I was like 50% dev, 50% manager, and Dave was on our team as the QA resource. We had two other devs, so there were basically 2.5 devs and David, and our sprint board, we had a to-do in progress. I think we had like a dev done, and we had an in-test column, and we would move things over there to done, and by Thursday of the week of the sprint, there would be like 4 or 5 different stories stacked up and in tests, and the expectation was that David was going to be writing tests for all of those, and we quickly realized he helped us realize, and our QA engineers are really good at helping us realize that we have to write, if we want to get this story done by the time we cut the branch for the week, we have to write the tests ourselves. And so now, if you look at least some of the boards, we have all these stories, and there's test tasks that anybody on the team is going to take. And it's it's a big shift, and we're trying to move from the spectrum from to where everybody's involved in quality. We're at different levels of that, but it's a lot better than it was just a couple years ago.
I think it's really valuable to get testers involved or get developers involved in testing. And one of the biggest things I think I mentioned earlier was like testability. Like if they have to write the tests or they have to write people's tests, like when they develop stuff, hopefully they're going to start thinking more about, how is this going to be tested? Can I design it in a way that's going to make testing easy? Like a really simple thing that here, so we do a lot of web stuff, and we have a bunch of Selenium tests, and just like putting IDs on like tags, so Selenium can like get to them. Like it's really simple, but developers like don't think about that unless they're like have to write those tests where they have to select the thing, and then they do start to think about it.
Well, the code's got to be written somewhere, and
Yeah.
a lot of times they don't realize either you have to write automation code to account for the fact we don't have IDs, or you can just write code to make IDs.
Yeah.
It's just something, I think something that just needs to be called out, because
Yes.
they're not writing tests, they don't know Selenium, they don't know how that works, and so if we just call it out and say, hey, hence your, I remember you mentioned that, like, we need testing hooks for this grid that, we're working on. And they realize that, and they
Yeah.
know exactly what needs to be done, they just need to be reminded.
Yeah, we had to convince development team to generate some tools for some of the teams that we use during development to generate IDs for everything we needed easily.
Mhm.
Yeah, because some of the dynamic software they use Sencha, it doesn't generate unique IDs for everything they needed, so they had to generate some other class or some other attribute that would be unique that we could use. But
Yeah.
exactly the problem. We had to go and ask
Yep.
them, you guys need this to be automated, the test to be automated fast enough, we need
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, and that's like ID is a real simple example, but I feel like there's just a lot of things that like if you're thinking about how am I going to have to test this, or you've had that experience, like you're gonna hopefully design stuff in a way that makes it easier to test and makes it the testers' lives easier, especially if that's your life.
I really like you were talking about Google trying to gamify the whole test
Mhm.
kind of ability. I mean, everybody in this industry is pretty good at trying to solve problems, and developers particularly. So I feel like when you present it as a challenge, it's kind of like, hey, we need you to find a way to get everything to tax, or something more complex. Instantly you put up a challenge and you say, like, hey, find a way.
Yeah.
And they'll probably arrive at a lot of solutions that are pretty good industry standards, automating your tests and stuff like that. But at the same time, when you're giving them a challenge, they may come up with a unique way. You're like, hey, we have a tool now that does this for us. And once you've got it, it's a little training, and now you have a really quick avenue from A to B.
You didn't mention this, but they have this way the reviewers are rated. Like if you're
Mhm,
reviewing,
yeah.
if you're in like a certain like a 5-star, I don't know how they gamified it, but here's Dave and he's 5-star in reviewing Python. He's the guy. He's your
Yeah.
guy.
Well, I think they did it on the whole team. So like the whole team couldn't go up a star until everybody
Right.
was doing that, which I thought was good too. Was like, that low 10% is always tough to pull up. And so if you get a little peer pressure, maybe you can get that, those guys who are fighting it to come up quicker.
Yeah, we really struggled with getting developers to assign unique identifiers, and so we just started, or we're just now starting to say, okay, we'll just create subtasks to the work we're doing, and with just a list of all the elements that we need identifiers for, and it's not gonna move through until that's done.
Nice.
Yeah, and if that becomes a pain point for them, they'll find a way.
Exactly, yeah. Keep the pain on the problem, yeah.
I'm curious, we've talked about development stuff for this and testing tools and things. I'm curious what people who do testing on a regular basis, what your breakdown is of stuff which is manual testing, stuff which is sort of using off-the-shelf products or existing tools, and stuff which is like code-related, script-related, making your own framework. What kind of coding do you do during the day versus what kind of tools do you use versus just meshing them?
We use open source Selenium, so we use Robot Framework to do a lot of our UI testing. So it's kind of built in Selenium, click elements are all the same standard there, but it's free, so it's awesome. And then we write a lot of tools to handle anything that's not either API, Selenium, or mobile, since Robot Framework has libraries for this. But we do a lot of tools for the back-end stuff. We have hooks into stuff whenever possible that will grab back-end items, and we may have to build our own code for that to run testing instead.
You're right, Python, that's hard to do some things that you can't do the robot.
Yeah, we do try to pull industry standards. We try to see what's out there that's being supported. It's one of our main criteria for pulling it in for a tool is that the community is active, so that like when the next version of Firefox comes out, we don't want all our tests to be broken for 6 months. We want somebody out there fixing the driver as soon as possible so we can get that next version tested.
But that's all the how, not the time spent.
Yeah,
We have
time
different
spent.
levels of people in our company. Particular people will spend probably 90% of their time working in a scripting language, building tools and building ways to test and writing automated tests. But probably we have a large chunk of our QA organization who's 50-50, 70-30, some form of a manual test, 30% some form of a scripted language.
And we have some teams that do zero automations.
Yeah.
So there's
We have grid skills the whole way.
it doesn't really translate down to two-person team or who else.
Is this all active?
The 4 of us back here and 4 right there. Yeah.
So we have a team that was originally dedicated to writing APIs for our product, and so that team used the framework. It's just what Keith was mentioning. So we have Robot, and then we have all these libraries. For the automation team, we have a Google, we call it Google Spot. These guys right here. These three.
But we
They
wrote-
created Bravo to them because they created the library that we use. And so when I joined the crew and said, okay, you guys are gonna need to run automation tests for API, we pretty much And it's because of the libraries that were provided for us. Basically, just call keywords that, oh, I need to test to call and get API. There's libraries provided for us. And so we were very confident that every time there is a sprint where there's like, oh, we're going to create new APIs. Okay, that's going to be automated. No question about that. But
We had to get to critical mass. We had to get to a point where that was
but
possible.
that's for just at least the product I was working on. That's different from the different products like Cytera, which I think you guys have.
It's a legacy monolithic architecture that's gonna take a while to get to that same level of automation ability.
Acceptable testing for that was like using Silk UI to do functional manual tests.
Yeah.
That's,
So-
that standard has changed.
To begin with, we spent a lot of time getting our framework up to the point where we could write tests quickly. And so, yeah, it took a lot of initial effort to get to that critical mass to be able to then, that next test is easier, that next test is easier, the next test is easier. What they call it, the hump of pain or something like that? It was one of the books we were talking about where it's like there's this big hump at the beginning of every automation. Doesn't matter who you are, what you're automating, there's just this big hump of trying to get what can be automated, and what's not going to be automated, identified so that you can, you try to automate it and then sometimes you can't. And so you go through this big learning curve of trying to figure out what's automatable. And then at the other end of that hump of pain, you really get, cruising. You really get a nice, you'll start returning that investment of the initial automation, and you'll have more time to spend on automation because you're spending less time doing the manual stuff, and then
We used to do 5 days of regression every sprint.
Right.
Yeah.
Now we do 0.
right. So yeah, it's good.
When I was everybody on QA have to do that.
For 5 days every sprint. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. It was good. Yeah, right now, yeah. You guys are tough. It's great.
It's great.
Sorry, and you other guys, do you guys do a lot of time in your day for building tools or a lot of time writing new tests?
Yeah, we don't, so our QA, we've got, QA, kind of segregated in, we've got our test engineers who are responsible for doing all of the manual testing, and we're quite immature with our automated testing today, but, we've got a core team that's, working on building that out right now, but it's gonna take some time.
Right.
At the bottom of the mountain, looking up.
Oh,
Not on the good side of the mountain. On the starter side.
Yeah.
I say I'm the first QA person, but we've done testing before, obviously. I mean, developers have tested each other's stuff, BAs or whichever person is performing,
Yeah.
wearing 5 hats that day is doing testing. But there's like, we're at 0 automated testing, so I've just been spent the last few weeks trying to do proof of concepts of like, yeah, we can get the interface automated here. We can do this section. This is a little more questionable. We're gonna think about what libraries we can use, or if we even have the resources. They haven't allotted enough human beings to possibly catch us up from like the last 15 years of stuff, in
Yeah.
the next 5.
Right.
So, maybe this just falls off. I don't know. Just trying to identify what those things are and see what we can possibly automate so that we can get some regression testing that does not involve human beings.
Right.
Which we don't have any of right now.
I haven't found a good way to get around that initial trying to automate everything, and just being frustrated, being like, all right, we're gonna try to automate this, and then find out later it's just some of the spots are just tough to automate, or just won't be worth the investment until much further down the road. So yeah, you start investing, and then you have to make the decision: do I continue to invest in this area of the application, or do I go over here?
I mean, in the spirit of making developers as efficient at building this stuff and doing this kind of testing as us, I would say during that like ramp up hump of pain, once you get like 10% through and you have an idea of your direction, you pull developers in to start contributing, even in small chunks. They start to understand the paradigm, they start to understand the way it's done,
start here, or here's a good example, maybe that'll get them in the right direction. And you only get like you said, the first 10%, and then that gives them enough direction that they can keep going maybe.
Even if it's only in the 10% time, or, whatever they find.
One of the interesting situations that I myself faced with over and over, I constantly hear, so I'm the QA manager here, and not here. So I constantly hear dev leads come in and saying, I need another QA body, I need more resources. And so, looking at, well, again, it goes back to the whole sprint, the word scrum, and the whole flow that they deliver late, so QA becomes, it's all QA, and they want to be developing something, whether it's for the next sprint or whatever. And so we sit down and we kind of talk about, well, are you guys following good developer practices, or are you guys, what is your code coverage, what is your unit test code coverage look like, what are these other dev practices that you should be, disciplines that you should be doing, and we're not good at that, we don't do well, and so, okay, go get good at that, and then come back and talk. But I did think about it, and to your point about getting, why don't I get them, because we could really use some help with the UI automation, and so I went to, I've had conversations with several of the dev leads, or dev managers, of multiple teams, and, hey, what do you think about this idea? And so I think it's a great idea, but I think if my developers have available bandwidth, they need to be spending it on things like unit and integration tests and things like that versus, building out, because we don't want that inverted pyramid where everything is UI automation, and it's brittle and performance stinks and all that kind of stuff.
So does anybody have like software engineers and test writing unit tests for the code the developers are writing, or is the developers currently write tests to cover their own code?
Our company is developer's job, and then we do actually, our QA engineers do review every code checking that developers do. They are aware of what is coming their way. They can point out, hey, the IDs are missing from here, so you can check it. And then part of it is that often what we find is that developers are not very good at verbalizing how the changes affect the system. And sometimes it's good to have another set of eyes even on those changes. Even though there are like design reviews and everything, how it actually gets implemented is often different from what we see in the design.
Where their judgment is maybe compromised by their pride or confidence.
Never.
I come from development, but it's like, if I say it's only gonna affect these things, it's only gonna affect these things.
The problem is that often what I find is that at least the type of stuff that we're working on is that I'm the QA manager at this company, but developers are often siloed into part of the areas of the product. But on the QA side, you can't really afford that. You kind of have to have a system level view. You kind of have to have in order to be a good voice of the customer, you kind of need to understand the user story instead of the to your heart. So developers may not realize that the change they're making, they're actually affecting the system.
This is high coupling in a lot of older systems.
Yeah, and that's the reason why. I mean, I wish we had more working towards more of these microservices or these serverless architectures, because there's just much, the code and the testing is much more, in smaller chunks. It's easier to block the concept. And that, the other thing I love about the whole microservices thing is that it really forces developers into this outside-in thinking. So that you define the API first, that's your contract, that's what you document.
story and, you know, is that the starting point for writing test cases for most people? I mean,
I like to think so. I mean, definitely what we try to do is that we try to. I mean, that was also a little bit of education to work out with our product managers to actually provide those user stories. Because at the end of the day, that's what we want to test against, and that's what we want to verify the design against, the implementation against. And if you don't have that, then it's up to the imagination of the developer.
Exactly.
Who often is very, distant from the customer, because, there is support and all that kind of layer between you and the customer.
As a product manager, I can say that that's happened, a lot of times where you have a developer who's extremely good at what they do, and if the requirements, user stories are clear, and if it's almost the reverse process of trying to convince QA to join the project. As a product owner or project manager, I have to convince the developer of what they're building and why. They have to have that context, because if they don't, they'll build something, they'll say, this is my interpretation of what you gave me, and it works fine from my perspective. And if it's, doesn't meet the ultimate, quality, which is customer likes it and it meets the business's, strategic goals, that is it the developer's fault? No, it might be the product manager's fault, or maybe the whole team's fault for not getting together as a team and deciding, this is what we're building, this is what we're going to decide, it meets the,
I mean, the way it boils down to me usually, and this is what I say, you have to first build the right it and then build it right, and then test the right it and test it right, right? So, because,
but it's that idea of educating the developers comes, from, I guess, many different directions, and ultimately the developer has to kind of buy into that and say, okay, now I understand what the acceptance criteria are. Therefore, I can write the perfect test case because I know, what it's supposed to do. And you may need other people involved, you may need a QA person to help and verify that. But the developer has had that education process and then taken care of it.
That's another mindset change that I think is real hard for the industry is that, old school software development, we tended to think about, the end product, whereas now it's more about iterative development, right? We don't know what the end product looks like necessarily, but with the information we have right now, let's get started on this iteration and then show if we see are we going the right direction and pivot if we have to. But that's a hard thing to do too.
And that's why I can't overemphasize enough the need to have, especially when sprint is before the sprint starts, to make sure that all the JIRA tickets have complete. We have a definition of done and definition of ready, and part of definition of ready is, does everybody agree that what you see in the success criteria or acceptance criteria is what we're trying to finish or complete for this particular ticket? If there are developers asking questions, why is it this, why is it that, then that means we're not there yet. Let's throw that ticket out the door because we can't really develop it, because that's where the problem comes in, where we already built it. Well, because if you guys had a discussion before you stacked pans and said we're gonna do this, then we could have avoided that from happening, right? It takes a certain kind of discipline too in the team to just say, okay, we know that we need to get this done, but since it's not complete, or the acceptance criteria doesn't have everything that we need, then we can't really commit to it.
Well, that's where I think where you were saying earlier, if we had user stories and everything was correct from there, that would give us the perfect test. I don't think I agree with that.
Nothing's ever perfect.
Oh, of course, yeah, sorry. I don't know if I agree with that 100%, just because I think it has to be tempered with building it right. So sort of, is this the right way to design something? Because clients and customers and that communication, you can ask for exactly what you think you want, and it comes out the other side. You just didn't realize you didn't want it. You've met every single set goal, but I think that needs to be tempered with a little bit of a technical design. Is this the right way to build something?
Exactly.
Maybe not. And that's, if you put those two together, I think you get a perfect kind of acceptance criteria, and that's when your whole team, we're all in. But those, I think you need both.
legacy code. I mean, a lot of times it's brand new. You actually don't really know what's
Yeah.
possible until you try something out and say, well, you know what, we didn't realize this is going to, break something else. So it's not the best way to build it. Let's rethink. Is that feature really necessary exactly the way you designed it, or,
Can we make some changes to it and still get the result we were hoping for?
I guess it's part of a QA job to basically anticipate all the other stuff that
Yeah.
engineers just don't see because they're so focused on solving specific one problem.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Be the devil advocate when these things starts.
Yeah. And it's good that at least for our company, we actually, QA is involved all the way. Like
Yeah.
as a QA manager, I actually attend swag meetings. I'm in there. I'm in the storyboarding. I'm in everything. And I always think about the QA mindset of like, how are we gonna test this? What's the best way to order this out so that when it gets into the sprint, that it will be followed and it's just gonna be continually,
Yep.
seamless flow, right? So.
Yeah, I get upset if teams have those type of meetings without a QA person. If I find out about it, I go have a talk with those
Yeah.
managers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I had a question. Atlassian was talking about going through the 6 dots.
Yeah.
At the end of the dots, there was no more QA within those dots. And then they talked about what else the QA person would be part of. Is this kind of like the last step of leading is leading? Is that something that we're supposed to do as QA, is train the team up to the point where they don't need us anymore?
That's the goal. Okay.
Yeah.
It's a real good question. Yourself out on
I
the
know.
job.
So the future, you didn't mention this in the book where they talked about the future of SETs, the
Mhm.
future of TEs, the future, and what they mentioned is that there is no. This is gonna. I read it and like, wow, really, this is where it's. I mean, this is their perception, right?
Yeah.
It's not happening, but basically what they're saying, there's no more SETs. There's only SWEs, software engineers who will write tests, considering testing as part of the feature, and it's just one.
Yeah.
It's just one role. And then what about the future of TEs, or test engineers? What they said was, what the book said that basically the test engineers would be more towards like analyzing. There's going to be dog fooders. There's going to be these testers. You're relying on actual users to actually test it, and then it's up to the test engineers to use that information and come up with data analytics, risk analysis on how to best test it. Basically, just guiding these dog fooders,
Mhm.
these beta users, as to how to test it, but not really actually doing the testing.
And I can add a little bit to that too. Our company just partnered with I'm with Sajeti, a consulting company. We just partnered with HP to produce a world quality report. And one of the items that came out of that report was the idea that the future of testing has a few more steps left that are still uncovered.
Mhm.
A lot of the testing, a lot of quality work's been done, left shifted into the development phase. Now things are moving back to the right side and going into production and looking at predictive analysis within your production systems. And that's where the analysis is going to start building now, with databases looking at logs, looking at where problems are occurring today in production, so you can predict where the problem's going to be, and so they can help write tests for those predictive looks.
Yeah.
Because every company, no matter who you are, has a gold mine of data about your own products.
Yeah.
That's most likely not being used. I mean,
Yes.
Google barely can use this. Google has everything in the world.
Yeah, they have all the
So
servers.
everybody smaller than that, I'm sure, is like tons of data that could be valuable to them if siphoned flow to nothing. So
Right.
yeah, pushing into that realm.
Yep. In fact, I was going to offer up, if you'd like, at the next meeting, I can help present some of that report. It's a really nice report that shows across industry what's happening, but more specifically around agile space, DevOps. It looks at IoT. It looks at a lot of cool stuff in terms of kind of what's happening with quality across the world right now. The report just came out today.
Okay.
I sent Carmino
Yeah, I
a
know,
copy of that. So if you'd like.
Yeah,
maybe
that sounds
I'll-
interesting. Let's
maybe in about a month, we
talk
can do something
afterwards.
Like that, I could do
Yeah.
a deck on that for you.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rick.
Yeah, I'd like to do that. Yeah.
Collecting data from my smart home.
They did 1,600 interviews across the world with CIOs, CEOs, dev managers, all kinds across all industries. So it was really quite interesting.
Cool.
And so I was just talking to you about my job, like 10 years ago in California. I was a software company, and I used to have QA managers, just want to touch base with her, see how she's doing. I said, how's being QA manager, document, and she said, I'm no longer a QA manager. I'm like, what do you mean? We don't have QA anymore. I'm an engineering manager, and actually the devs are the ones listening. Oh, I didn't get into details. I would love to have a discussion with her on that, but that was just like, it's funny because it's just like right after I read the book, and now it's like my former QA manager saying she's no longer a QA manager because they don't have QA managers anymore. They don't have a QA team. They have the developers write their tests. I'm like, oh my gosh. I think it's coming to fruition.
Yeah.
You start to see the title go on too. Like
Yeah.
just an engineering manager slash QA or
Right.
test or.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the whole thing was predicated on efficiencies and making everybody as effective as possible.
Yeah.
The most effective way is to not write bugs.
Yeah.
Just not create them. And that's, human error is gonna make them, but if you're the ones also checking it, or your neighbor's checking it, you can cut down on that a lot. Not to mention, less people, or same amount of people and more productivity.
More generalist, less specialist.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Well, I guess that is it. I want to thank everyone for coming and the good discussion.
This is awesome.
Yeah, so I'll probably try and set up another one for in about a month.
Yeah, that's good.